Thank you so much for making time out of your day to be here. This is a webinar on self-care, and I am joined by my colleague Claudia, who's a prevention coordinator here at ANDVSA, and we're going to be talking a little bit. First, we're going to jump into kind of why we need self-care and talk a little bit about trauma, and then we'll move into some more concrete steps about actually building a self-care plan that works for you.
And I do want to, this is Claudia, I do want to say that this webinar is being recorded, so please make sure to share what you want others to hear. If there's something you're not comfortable sharing or you're not comfortable having it being on the recording, please don't share it. But this is something that as you hear things, if there's something that you think others could use, please go ahead and pass it along to others. This webinar is part of a series for Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month, and what we're doing is we're going to have these recordings up on the web so that youth and adults and sort of all of us doing this work around the state, violence prevention, but then also sort of other advocacy work, we could continue to use this resource. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there and go ahead and kind of share with others as you see fit.
And just some reminders about GoToTraining. Please keep your phones muted. Or your speakers, computers muted if that's the way you are on audio today. And then remember that you can use the chat box, which is a great way to share information with us. And you can select to share it with the entire audience or with me as the presenter. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to start by talking a little bit about burnout. The American Psychological Association defines burnout as the fatigue, cynicism, and professional inefficiency that comes with work-related stress. So I think that all of us probably have a pretty good understanding of what burnout is. I think it's just really powerful to know that burnout has actually been identified by psychologists as something that naturally happens to many of us due to high stress in our workplace. So it's normal to experience burnout, especially in careers where we are helping others. Think about advocates in DVSA shelters, teachers, doctors, nurses, these professions where we really support other people sometimes mean that we forget to support ourselves and we can start to feel really burnt out. I think the most important part in discussing burnout is to really be aware that it exists and start to notice when you may be feeling burnt out, so that you can take some preventative steps before you might want to do something more drastic like quitting your job. Compassion fatigue is the profound emotional and physical erosion that takes place when helpers are unable to refuel and regenerate. So again, those of us that work in helping professions have the responsibility of so many other lives at stake, and sometimes that emotional toll can be big on us. And a lot of us work in confidential fields too, so at the end of my day, even when I want to vent to my partner, I'm not even able to do that. So a lot of times I really feel like I carry the burden of a lot of other people's stories on my backs, and that can be kind of an example of what compassion fatigue really can look like. Vicarious trauma. Repeated exposure to difficult stories changes our view of the world. This is part of the cost of caring for others. So vicarious trauma, I like to call the law and order effect, because that's how it kind of is easier to remember in my mind. So when I was in high school, I loved Law and Order SVU. That was one of my favorite shows, and I watched it all the time. Today, after working in the domestic violence and sexual assault field for the last 5 years, I can absolutely not watch this show. I find it really traumatizing. I find, flaws in it, that it's unrealistic, and I get upset by it, things like that. And so that is an example of the way that the trauma of our work has actually sunk into how I perceive the world around me. There's really a lot of examples of this, and I imagine that each of you can think of examples in your own life about how your work has impacted your view of the world. Another type of trauma that it's so important to mention is historical trauma. This is the idea that trauma can be passed down through generations and felt throughout communities and within cultures. In Alaska, when we talk about historical trauma, we're often talking about the trauma that has been passed down through generations of Alaska Native people. So the trauma of, the initial colonization in Alaska and the extermination of thousands of Native people, the trauma of boarding schools, residential school systems here within the state of Alaska, where children were taken from their home communities. They were not allowed to speak their traditional languages or participate in, their traditional ceremonies and dances, and were taken from their homes. There was also a lot of abuse that happened during this time, both sexual abuse as well as physical abuse. So these are all traumas that were experienced, a few hundred years ago, and those traumas have absolutely been passed down generations and are still felt in our communities today. Sometimes we see this trauma play out in higher rates of substance abuse, in further victimization caused by domestic violence and sexual assault. And although we talk about historical trauma in the context of Alaska Native issues, I think it's also important to remember that there's historical trauma that's felt by every cultural group. My grandmother talked a lot about the trauma as a child of living in a large family and the poverty that she experienced, and that impacts the way that, even my mother was very wary of saving money in a bank, right? So there's these things that get passed down through our families that I think each of us have a story to tell about that. Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart said that first we must confront the historical trauma. Second is understanding the trauma. Third is releasing the pain of historical trauma. And fourth is transcending the trauma. I really like the concept of transcending trauma, and I think that that's really what we're getting into today with building a self-care plan. Definitions of self-care. So we've provided 2 different definitions, but there are hundreds, and I think it's an interesting just to even research your own definition and kind of build a definition that works for you. The Native Wellness Institute describes self-care as taking care of ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually so that we can better live in balance. Self-care is critical to any helper or healer because we can only give what we have. And I think that's a really powerful statement that we really must take care of ourselves before we can support others. We talk a lot in our work about building resilience. When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, we talk about, the coping skills that children develop in order to be resilient adults. And I think that self-care is really about building these patterns of resilience. Self-care refers to activities and practices that we can engage in on a regular basis to reduce stress and maintain and enhance our short and longer-term health and well-being. I wanted to talk briefly about activism and self-care. We talk about, trauma within our work, But also, I think it's important to recognize that work is not necessarily the work that you're actually getting paid to do, right? A lot of the work that we take on are volunteer positions, it's activist positions. This quote comes directly from Know Your Title IX, which is a great website on learning about Title IX, the policies in place to help support students experiencing sexual assault and harassment on college campuses, as well as domestic violence on college campuses. So activism is our way of caring for ourselves, regardless of the extra difficulty it may bring to our lives. It is through activism that we find support networks, validate our traumas and healing, and envision safer schools. So while it can be really intense to be constantly fighting the struggle to, in this case, end sexual assault on campus, it's also so important to realize that this is how we make friends. These issues that we care about also help to validate our existence and give us a real purpose in our lives, and that can really be a part of the healing process and a part of your self-care plan, as long as it doesn't become so overwhelming that you don't have anything else in your life to look forward to, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more positively about how to foster happiness. Neuroplasticity means your brain is learning just like you are, and it can be trained. You have the power to rewire your brain. One thing that I think all have a tendency to do, I'm just going to pause for 1 second. If you could please mute your phones, that would be great. So your brain naturally focuses on negative things. This is a survival skill that we developed. You know, you want to naturally focus on what that sound is in the forest so you can avoid the bear. In our lives today, that might play out in, you know, when a teacher says really good things about your paper overall and mentions 5 awesome things about the essay you wrote, but says 1 negative thing, you focus on that 1 negative thing and start to really kind of internalize that 1 thing, and you kind of forget all of those positive things that were said. I think, you know, in conversations with your boss, that's another way that I would think about this. Focusing on the positive may sound like a really simple answer of how to rewire your brain, but it's actually been scientifically proven that if you dwell on positive events for at least 10 seconds, those positive moments can be submitted from short-term to long-term memory. So when someone gives you a compliment, instead of deflecting that compliment, really try to take the time to think about how happy that made you feel and enjoy that and know that you deserve that compliment, and that will help you actually submit that into your long-term memory. So once you really have found patterns to develop more happiness in your life, there's another thing that happens, which is that there's a hedonic adaptation. This is the idea that no matter how good something makes us feel, most of the time we drift back to where we started, emotionally speaking. So what I would call this is the honeymoon phase, right? Things are going really well, you've been really loving running, and it's been bringing you so much joy, but all of a sudden, a couple months into training for your next event, you start to feel really burnout with running, and it's not making you feel the way it used to. To slow down the adaptation process, there's 2 things that psychologists recommend, and that is both variety and appreciation. Variety meaning to mix it up. So if running is the activity that you are really passionate about, instead of running on the same track, try to find a new trail or download a new running app, or instead of running 3 times a week, try doing a different cardio workout 1 time a week and running twice a week. Really mixing up the activity and building upon an activity that you already enjoyed, but changing it enough that your brain gets something new. And appreciation is, again, back to this concept of really dwelling on the positive, taking time to really note positive and healthy things that are going on in your life. And sometimes that can mean having more conversations with friends and family about those things, or writing them down or journaling about them, things like that. So I'm going to pass the mic on to Claudia, and she's going to talk more specifically about making a self-care plan. I did want to mention that we have some materials today that I have actually attached. In the materials section of the webinar, you're going to see 3 different things: a maintenance self-care worksheet, a self-care webinar from the Native Institute on Wellness, and a self-care assessment tool. So I can send those out in the email to everyone after today's webinar, but also those tools are attached there for you to view, and we're going to show some of them as we talk about making a self-care plan today.
All right, everyone. So this is Claudia, and what I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about today is really how to break down and create a plan for yourself that includes things that make you happy and that can kind of work for you across the different sort of parts to ourselves, right? So we're spiritual people, we're also emotional people. There's mental sort of self-care that we can do, and there's also that physical piece, right? So there's so much to it that it's really, really important for us to actually make plans and think about it in a purposeful way. And the beautiful part about it is that there's some really great tools that you can take to adapt. And especially as you're working with teens, one thing that I've really noticed is that as we work with teens sort of in our communities, a lot of the things that can happen is that they get really, really busy. And so a lot of the same leaders get pulled into so many directions that it gets really hard for them to be able to focus on the things that they want to focus. So it's not just important for us to think about it from the perspective of an adult, but then also these increased responsibilities that we've put on youth, it's really important to take into account their self-care as well. So there's some great tools, and I do encourage you to take them and adapt them to working with a youth population if that's what you're doing. So there's 3 steps that we've identified to improving your emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical health, and also kind of maintaining that in the long run, kind of like what a lecturer was talking about. So making it so that it's a habit, making it so that it just becomes part of our lives. It's not something that we do when we're in crisis. It's not something that we do when we really get to the end of feeling burnt out, but something that we continue to do. So there's 3 things to keep into account and sort of 3 steps to doing this process. And so first is really important to reflect and to be aware of where you're actually at. Think about what triggers your stress. Think about what helps your stress. Identify what those positive coping skills are, and then also where you're at as well with your triggers and with your overall health. So the second step is really finding a good balance and creating healthy boundaries, so that different parts of our brains are engaged and that we're not actually creating more work when we're trying to sort of fix this problem, right? So one example that I can think about, and we'll talk some more about examples later, but I'm really interested in gardening, and so I'm taking this class, but one thing that happened is that I'm realizing that there's a lot to this class that I'm taking. And so I'm really excited about it, but it's actually making it stressful for me instead of something fun. And so trying to find the right balance for yourself between, you know, fixing this problem and also realistically what you have time for, what makes sense for you. And then also creating healthy boundaries for yourself, because that can really ensure that things are happening in the long run. So if I'm really, really committed to working out every single morning, making sure that that's something that remains, even when people are trying to schedule meetings, or even, you know, even as other things come up, it's really important to create those healthy boundaries for yourself so that it can really become habits, and that it can improve our long-term physical health, emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental health. So the last step is creating connections in your community, and strengthening the things that you're doing. So having the support of others as you're going through your self-care plan. And that's really, again, important to maintaining this plan and to have it take place for you sort of every day on an ongoing basis. So the first step is the awareness and reflection piece. So part of being aware is examining your current coping skills and really evaluating those skills to whether they're actually positive or negative. So all of us actually cope with stress in some way. It comes out in some way, but it's not always necessarily a positive way. So I'd like for you all to maybe take just a little bit of time, and I want you to think about 3 things that you do when you're stressed. And then we'll, so write those out on a piece of paper. And then we're going to eat Girl Scout cookies. I know, they're out too. It's evil. So having a treat or a snack, right? What are some other things? So go ahead and type it out in the chat box. What are some things that you do when you're stressed, when you're experiencing stress? Push-ups. Hike. So go outside and enjoy sort of our beautiful state. That's awesome. So breathe. So when you're actually in crisis, taking a deep breath, relaxing, and kind of letting things pass.
So then dial a friend, that one's great too. So then you don't need to actually share with us the negative coping skills, but we do want you to also think about that. Are there any, you've listed some really positive ones, are there any that you might experience that are not so positive? And kind of reflecting on that for a moment, and you can write those down, not in the chat box, but just, you know, to yourself on a piece of paper, and we'll give you a couple seconds to do that too. So I'll just give an example of, you know, one of my positive coping skills. I put a picture here of an art journal, and I have my own art journal, and that's one thing that I do that I think is a positive thing. One of the negative things I would say is when I experience, you know, a intense event, I really reflect on it so much that it starts to feel kind of obsessive and hard for me to break out of that pattern, and I think about it kind of over and over again. That really causes more anxiety over time, right?
So one example for me, as far as sort of a positive coping skill, is that I've sort of learned to garden, and so it like kind of engages a different part of my brain. I don't have to think about work. My brain just doesn't really allow it as my hands are moving, as I'm dealing with these plants, as I'm outside. So it's a different experience that doesn't allow me to dwell on that too long. However, there's times where I definitely entirely watch too much Netflix, and so that's not necessarily a positive coping skill, and maybe it's fine if in moderation, but when really it becomes like maybe what you do all the time, or maybe a couple nights a week or 3 nights a week or something, maybe that's a little bit too much, and it's not actually doing what you think it's doing. And also, there's a lot of time spent there as well. So there's some reflection and assessment tools that we've sort of figured out that can help you as you're trying to improve the coping skills that you have and as you're trying to create a self-care plan. So on the left, there's a University of Buffalo worksheet, and it encourages you to think about what your current practices are, sort of for those 4 parts of ourselves that are really important. And think about what your current practice is, and then also plan out a new practice. So keeping things new, keeping things interesting is really important, to not sort of slide back to where we were before, and to also continue to make it sort of a daily thing, continue our growth together. Additionally, there's a Native Wellness Institute worksheet as well, and that also helps you to assess how you're doing. And there's kind of 2 different levels there. One is assess where your strengths are. So that's the middle center. That's that core piece. So what are things emotionally that you do really well? So I talk to my friends about my problems. I also maybe talk to a counselor about my problems. And then I'm a direct communicator, so I can set my boundaries really well. So that can be an example of strengths that I have emotionally. One example that Electra's talked about is sort of that rumination piece. So like I dwell on things maybe for far too long instead of just letting them go. So it helps you improve, and it helps you think about also what those positive things are, right? Because Electra also talks about how important it is for us to dwell on the positive things that we have within ourselves. And I don't know what you said, but it was like 10 seconds. If you dwell on a compliment for 10 seconds, that can be really powerful to rewiring your brain. So same thing here. So spiritually, I have these really good skills, and here's some things that maybe I'm not doing really well. Physically, you know, I go hiking, I do all of these different things, but maybe I'm also not necessarily going to the doctor enough. So then maybe there's some stress there when I don't really know how I'm doing physically. So there's examples, and I encourage you to take these worksheets so that you can adapt them to the population that you're working with, and also to specifically think about how to engage youth using these. Any questions so far?
This is Electra. Just a reminder that these tools are attached in the materials section, and at the end of the webinar, we can also share with you the websites of where we found these tools for some more information.
Mm-hmm. So make sure to actually balance out the things that you are putting on your plate as a way of self-care. So make sure that the self-care plan that you're creating isn't actually turning into something that you're going to fail at or be bad at, or the things that you are bringing into your self-care plan actually make sense with what your needs are. So I was telling Electra that doing this work, I like watching documentaries and things like that, but I've learned that there's certain documentaries I just can't watch anymore because it just feels too much like work. And so trying to figure out what are some non-trauma related interests and hobbies that can allow that other part of our brain to be engaged. There's also relaxation techniques that are out there that can sort of make a big difference, and you don't have to sort of invent them. They're all out there. So I would encourage you to also look up some relaxation techniques. And if you're experiencing sort of stress in your teen group or with the folks that you're working with, there's lots and lots for youth as well. So find what those techniques are, find what works with your group, and try to make sure that, you know, most things when we experience stress are really within our ability to handle, but it's really about making sure that we're not putting ourselves through the stress in that moment. And here's another basic thing, which I think I kind of forget sometimes, but, you know, literally and physically take care of your body. So make sure to eat well, sleep enough, you know, be physically active, maintain those things that really actually are going to help you to feel really good. So there's these basic things that sometimes we forget for ourselves. So that's another way of maintaining your balance, because things can feel really stressful when you haven't had a lot of sleep. Things can feel really stressful when your blood sugar is going up and down because you haven't eaten. It's also important to set those healthy boundaries for yourself. If self-care is important to you and you want to make sure that it's something that's ongoing, it's really important to set your boundaries for yourself. A lot of the time we get fatigued because we don't have good boundaries and because we're not setting those for ourselves. So make sure it's okay to say no. It's okay to not take on too many new things. And really the most important thing is building a self-care plan that really works for you and that helps you feel better, stop being burnt out, and also helps you re-energize you as you're doing this work. And the other piece is, and I think it's also important to talk to youth about this, but it's okay to take breaks in relationships that don't feel healthy or supportive to you. So if it's something that triggers you, if this is something that sort of puts you back in your self-care, if it's folks that aren't listening to what your boundaries are, it's okay to take care of yourself, focus on yourself, and take breaks from those relationships. And I think just putting that out there for youth can make a big difference in how actually them understanding that that's an option. Saying no is an option, breaking off relationships that don't feel healthy is an option as well. So the other piece, and I can't remember this study either, but being connected to other people makes a big difference in how we see ourselves. And so it's really important to have friends, to connect with other people that aren't just in your sort of work, in your work sort of area, I guess. Because we tend to ruminate, we tend to talk about the same things, and so when we create new connections, new relationships, it allows those other parts of our brains to function, and it allows us to let go of some of the things we're ruminating, and also create new connections. So, and it's also really important to think about the folks that can help support us in particular ways. So there's things that stress me out that I can't talk to every single person about. They're either too private, or they may not want to hear about those things, or they may not give the kind of advice that I need at that time. So I think it's really important to think through a list of people that you can call about work-related stress, maybe family-related stress, maybe there's some stress that's sort of outside of those realms, but really thinking through who your support systems are, and when they come in and when you really need them. Learning something new is also really important. Again, keep in mind that balance for yourself. Again, I'm taking that gardening class and it's really fun, but I'm stressing out over all these chapters that I'm supposed to read. So make sure that if you're learning something new, that it's actually balanced and makes sense with your life. And this is another thing that I think is really, really important to stress for teens. But alone time is really important, and a balance of alone time and then also being social, being with our families, being with our friends is important. So finding a balance in our connections as well. All right, so for making a concrete plan, it's important to actually set attainable goals and to think through some of these questions that we have put up here. So how much free time do you actually have, and how much will this activity actually take? If you don't have time for it, you're actually just stressing yourself out. So set your attainable goals. And you gave an example earlier, Electra, about running.
Yeah. So if you are thinking, I have never run before, but I really want to get into it, it's probably not a great idea for your self-care plan to be, I'm going to run for an hour every single day. That is a huge thing to take on, right? It would probably be much more reasonable and attainable if you said, I am going to train to run a 5K 6 months from now. And in order to do that, I need to do, a couple cardio workouts a week, and I need to find a running buddy that I share my goals with, or something like that, right? So really thinking about making goals that are not going to set you up to fail, but really set you up to achieve them. I did want to share one tool during this part, which is, let's see. It's an assessment tool. Here we go. So if everyone can see this, I think this is a really good way before you start actually doing your plan to identify what you already do as self-care, and that can help you identify where there might be gaps. I'm already really good at eating regularly, but what I'm eating isn't necessarily so healthy. So once you kind of identify some of those gaps, then you're able in your self-care plan to try to figure out how to achieve those gaps.
So the great thing about these tools, and I've seen them kind of in different versions of this in youth group leader work. So Sitka Youth Leadership Committee is a group of youth in Sitka that meet very regularly and meet around violence prevention. And so they have all of these goals that they set for themselves, and it's often very, very involved what they're doing, and so the youth get really busy. But one of the things that they do, they ask sort of like a series of questions when youth are first joining the group. So I think some of the questions are, what do you hope to get out of this? What are some of your goals around that? What do you bring to the group? And then also, one of the things was, what are you going to do when things become overwhelming? So really naming that before you start doing work with youth and saying, when things become overwhelming, this is what the plan is. And so having youth reflect on what those positive things that they have are, and then also think about having sort of a straightforward way of addressing them. And so naming it from the beginning, this might become really overwhelming. What do we do about that? It allows for youth to actually verbalize some of those things as opposed to, hiding it or not talking about it or just, not show up anymore because they just can't. So for youth, when you're, and this actually really helps with youth as well, but making visual reminders of either their goals for self-care or your goals for self-care. Write it down, sticky note on your desk, maybe your calendar can help. I like, for my workouts, I like to rip little things out so that it makes me feel like I've, achieved something for the week. I don't know why the workout itself doesn't give me that much, but it really helps to kind of make it visual, bring it into your space, whether at work or in your home, so that it becomes part of what you do and what you see every day. And you can also develop your own tool. So that was a tool that I mentioned that was just developed based on the needs of the youth there. It's also important to engage others in your goal. So if you're trying to work out every morning, but your partner keeps you up really late, or they don't necessarily maybe make the space for you to work out, or there's something else going on, maybe there's some rearranging to do, who knows what the example might be. But if those around you aren't supporting your goal, then it becomes sometimes hard to maintain those goals. Sometimes I think about this too in our work, sort of, if your boss doesn't support your self-care plan, it can be really hard for you to pull that off. It can be really hard for you to actually say, okay, when I feel overwhelmed, I'm going to go for a walk. Well, your boss might totally take that the wrong way without understanding that this is part of what you need to be a healthier person and to work at your agency longer or to continue volunteering longer, right? So make sure that those around you support your goals. And the other piece is, if you aren't able to meet your goal, don't be too hard on yourself, right? So then we're sort of falling back into those same old mental patterns of ruminating on what we did, ruminating on what's wrong with us, as opposed to, oh my goodness, here I am trying, here I am thinking about what I'm doing for self-care, and maybe my goal didn't make sense with the time that I have, but I'm thinking about it. I'm assessing where I'm at, and I'm potentially seeing gaps. So I think it's really important to just ease up on ourselves, give ourselves time to build this into our everyday life, and to reflect on what we can do better next time.
So again, there's some great tools for making a concrete plan, and I also think that it's really simple to develop your own tool, you know, writing down a goal and writing down the steps to achieve that goal. It could be as simple as that. But here is one of the tools that is from the Native Wellness Institute. So this actually breaks it down into your spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical needs. And then it gives you how you're going to achieve those goals each week. And, you know, for you, it might be that you really just want to actually maintain the same goals every week. You know, maybe having a stable and consistent workout routine has been something you've struggled with. Or maybe you really want to build upon each goal each week. You know, I don't think it matters as long as it really works well for you. So this year, I've started to develop my own self-care plan, and I'll just talk a little bit about the tools I used. I bought a planner that had lots of room to write in it, and I set monthly goals, not weekly goals. I felt like weekly just didn't really give me enough time to accomplish them, and it made it a little bit more stressful. I also really tried to engage friends in my goals, so I've always wanted to take a dance class, and I never really had the courage to do so. And so my friend and I decided to take a dance class that was once a week, and so I've been doing that dance class. But I also, you know, travel a lot for work, and I get busy, and so instead of saying I'm going to make sure I do that dance class every single week, I said to myself, I'm going to do that dance class at least 3 times a month. And that felt a little bit easier to me. And then this one's kind of silly, but another thing that I found really helped me was in my planner, I bought a set of really fun markers so that I started to use different colors for different kind of goals. So I would write some of my, you know, goals at work in blue. You know, they were the more like concrete goals that weren't really as fun and a part of my self-care plan, but were like legitimate things that I needed to get done for my job. But then for my fun self-care goals, you know, I wrote them in hot pink and started to identify like where those hot pink spots were in my planner, and I also tried to check off on the days of the week where I actually completed some of my goals. And then when you look back through your calendar, that can actually be a way that you're reflecting on these positive moments. It's like, oh, look, there's a check mark on, you know, these 2 different days last month where I completed my dance class, or, you know, there's another symbol that I've used, you know, on a different day where I walked enough steps that day and felt really good about how many steps I had walked. So this healing plan worksheet is a really helpful one, but like I said, you know, anything can really be a tool. You could even use an app on your phone. There's lots of good apps out there to kind of goal-setting apps, particularly for exercise, but even just making a note on the calendar within your phone of what days you completed which goals can be helpful.
And one example that I have where I sort of had to tweak some things was that I realized that I mean, I really love to cook, but then, you know, every time I go home to sort of get that stress out and maybe do some cooking, it turned into a thing to where if there wasn't enough groceries for that evening to, like, get done what I wanted to get done, I'd have to go get them, and dinner would be really late. And so there's these stressors that would happen, and plus, sometimes I just wouldn't do it because it was too late. So I'd end up not eating anything or cooking, which is that piece that I was looking for to help me de-stress. So what I did is, and then the other piece was that if I wasn't cooking, there would be sort of no leftovers. I wouldn't necessarily take care of myself very well the next day, wouldn't bring any food to work. And so sometimes I wouldn't eat, or I'd buy something, you know, from around here, which would then stress me out money-wise. So there was kind of this thing going on where I really wanted to start cooking more, but realistically it wasn't happening. So I started doing grocery shopping sort of in bulk once a week. And so thinking through for the week what I wanted to make, maybe what I could do with those ingredients, and then all of those stressors kind of went away because I was able to think about it in advance. And I was also able to say to my partner, hey, this is something that I really enjoy doing. I don't mind cooking, but it becomes a stress when we don't have groceries, when I have to sort of make that up and stop by the store, do all these things. So making that small change in how I was trying to accomplish my goal really made a difference. But I had to reflect on what exactly was going on. I had to reflect on why this wasn't happening, even as I had, self-care plans and goals for myself related to this. It still wasn't happening. So that reflection really helped me to figure out, okay, here's something that I can do moving forward.
So to close today, I just wanted to go kind of back over some of the resources that we have. ANDBSA every Tuesday, or almost every Tuesday, we post a new self-care idea on our Facebook page. So that can be kind of a fun resource. And then we also share those self-care ideas in our Pinterest board. So facebook.com/ANDBSA and search for us on Pinterest. There are a lot of really good apps out there that can support you in your journey to build a self-care plan or to meet your exercise needs. There's also really good meditation applications out there as well. One that I really like is called Stop, Breathe, and Think. And there are free meditations that you can listen to based on kind of what current mood you're in. There are tons of apps that will help you count your steps throughout the day, and that's a really easy way for you to achieve a goal because you know exactly how many steps you've taken each day. There are also apps. There's an app called Gratitude 365, and that is an app for basically keeping a gratitude journal. And looking back on that gratitude journal can be a really positive way to, rewire your brain to think about things in a happier way. There's thousands of apps out there, and I think it's pretty neat that we can really use these technology tools to support us. I've attached the Native Institute on Wellness PowerPoint presentation, and I can send that out as email as well. And that talks a little bit more about self-care plans within the workplace, which is really good, as well as having those tools, those worksheets included that we've already mentioned. And a lot of the resources that we've shared today are from the University at Buffalo School of Social Work. And so I've put the URL there, but I've also attached some of those resources, the assessment tool, as well as the self-care maintenance plan to kind of get you started about thinking about self-care. And of course, if you have any fun ideas, I'm always looking for new ideas to share on Facebook. This is an activity that I've done statewide with advocates, and it's really fascinating to see how different advocates do different activities for self-care, and that those activities can be different based on which community and which culture you're from. And I think that's a really neat thing about building a self-care plan is how individualized it can be.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I do want to put out, a call for questions. If there's any questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat box. I do think it's important for us to think about self-care for the youth that we work with. And so I do encourage you to kind of think that through. And in some sense, you can do some self-care for the whole group. If something's going on for the whole group, you can do polling. You can kind of create some tools that, and one example that I've seen in the past is using stickers and having youth kind of go around the room and place stickers around how they're feeling, either with the planning that's going on or how they're feeling generally, to kind of see, hey, why is everybody so down and why aren't we moving forward with this project? Or, what can we do to sort of boost the excitement? and the level of engagement. So I do think that it's really worth thinking through how to use these tools for your youth audience and with the youth that you're working with, and then also just kind of naming it. Self-care for teens is really, really important as well. So are there any questions that folks have related to this topic? All right, thank you, Chad.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And a reminder that we have recorded this webinar, and we will be able to share it with you, and so that you can share it with others and even use it as a training tool within your agency or within your conversations with teams who you are working with. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.